Well, there's an empty chair up here if anyone wants to come sit in it. No takers. Okay. I'll just stay here.
Notice how we all jumped up and had to fight each other.
I know, right?
I was gonna say, I'm not man enough.
That's funny. You just gotta sit, I guess. Okay. Well, as you all are aware, we've been in John for a while now. And we've been proceeding through chapters 13 through 17, which are all kind of one unit, one discourse that Jesus has, or one interaction with the disciples in the upper room on the night of his betrayal. So we have lots of events yet to come, but everything that we looked at in John 13 through 17 is in a very compact space, in a very compact, really probably a very compact time frame as well. We know that there was a meal involved and that there was a foot washing and those kind of things. So it's not like, there's 30 minutes in the upper room and got out of there quickly. We know there was some time spent there, but it wasn't, it might have been, I don't know, a couple of hours, but it wasn't like multiplied hours and hours. It might have been, a couple of hours in that evening, and then leading into the dismissal that we're going to see here in just a little bit to the garden, and then the events that took place through the night, the trial, and those kind of things. So it's interesting. It's taken us, I don't even know now how many weeks we've been in this section, but it's taken us weeks and weeks and weeks to kind of parse through all this and break all this down. And really what it amounts to is a couple of hours on the last evening of Jesus' life before he was crucified. So it's interesting how much time we can spend digesting all of that and taking it in when, again, as we kind of try to put ourselves into the apostles' shoes and what they were experiencing, they experienced all of this in the space of just a short time frame. And here we've spent weeks and weeks kind of poring over it, and still feel like, I don't know about you, but I still feel like there's things that I need to go deeper on and try to get a better grip on or a better understanding on. But what must it have felt like to be there in that moment and have all this kind of feel like a whirlwind, like that was over so fast. It happened, and then it's, we're on to the next thing, and now it's, the trial is happening, now the crucifixion is happening, so all of these things have to unfold for them probably what feels like a very rapid fire succession of things. And I think maybe if we miss, maybe if doing it the way we've done it makes us miss anything, that's probably what we miss, is the urgency and the quickness with which things unfold beginning on this night for Jesus. And so I don't want to try to speed through any of it just to give us that sense of urgency or that sense of quickness, but I think it's interesting to point out that that we are taking a lot of time to talk about something that happened in the space of a couple of hours. And so, without further ado, without dragging it out more and more hours, last week we were in John 17, and I didn't work up a bunch of review slides or anything about what we've read up to this point. But what is happening in John chapter 17? Jesus prays, and we talked about, this really is the Lord's Prayer. We talked about the Lord's Prayer being from Matthew 5, I think, the Sermon on the Mount. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, and on and on. But that really is the disciples' prayer. The Lord gave that to the disciples to pray.
Because they asked him, Lord, teach us to pray.
Exactly, Lord, teach us to pray, and that was his response to that. The disciples, they taught John's disciples, or John taught his disciples how to pray. Lord, will you teach us to pray? And so he teaches them to pray with those words, and so that really is the disciples' prayer. And what we have here in John 17 is the Lord's Prayer. So at least in this instance, and it really is the longest prayer that we have recorded by Jesus in the Bible. Most of the time when it tells us that Jesus was praying, it just says that. It says, pray, or he was alone by himself and he prayed, or praying fasting, or whatever. But it doesn't really give us the text of that. And so I think it's a special chapter for us in the Bible to be able to look at John chapter 17 and actually see the words of one of Jesus' many prayers. So what are some things that Jesus prays for that we've made it down through verse 21? We're going to pick up at verse 22 in just a minute. So in this first part, first 2/3 or so, through verse 21, what are some things that Jesus has prayed for?
Unity.
Unity. That was a big one, right? Prays for unity, that his followers would be unified as he and the Father are unified. Just really delves into the subject of unity. He doesn't just make it a cursory, let them be one, Father, and then move on. But he really prays about that unity. He really specifies some things about the type of unity that he wants them to experience. So unity is a huge part of this prayer. Tim?
It's an adoption, and really speaking of us being part of that family.
Okay.
That trying,
Yeah.
we get to be one in Christ, and Christ in us, and He in us. He in us, and us in Him,
Right.
and God, all three together. That's just, you can't get your head around that.
And I think that, unity applies to that as well. It's not just unity amongst us, but it's a unity for us because we were unified with Christ. And so there's that old, there's an illustration of how do God's believers become more unified. It's by drawing closer to Him, because the closer we get to Him, the closer we get to one another. If you could kind of visualize that we all start out, away from God, but as we draw closer to Him, we draw closer to one another. And so I think that's it couples right with that prayer for unity, that we are being unified in Christ and unified in the Father through our relationship with Him. Okay? Any other thoughts stand out for you as we proceed, Greg?
Well, I don't know if we've gotten to verse 23 yet, but in them, and it's talking about being one as we are one, and them and you and me. Maybe you brought to complete unity to let the world know that you sent me and have loved them, even though you've loved me. Unity is also tied to our being effective in evangelism. To let the world know that you sent me. When we started breaking up in denominations, when we started having, less clear message of what the gospel was and what the church was, that's the devil's tool to keep us from being evangelistic. And it's a confusing picture that it makes it harder to evangelize.
Yeah. I agree. It muddies the waters. I mean, the things that, when we start focusing on the things that separate us or that divide us, then it makes it harder to point to the one thing that really unites us, and that is Christ. Okay, well, I'll have some kind of thoughts to wrap up, so I'm not going to give away my thoughts right now, because if I start, I'll end up where I want to finish without getting there first. Not sure that made sense, but made sense in my mind. So we want to, I want to start in verse 22. That's where we got to. We got verse 21 last week, and we will look at verse 22 through 24. So I'm doing all the stuff tonight. I'll read it, then I'll commentate. So don't have Justin here to help out tonight. The glory which you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may be perfected in unity, so that the world may know that you sent me, and loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, be with me where I am, so that they may see my glory which you have given me, for you loved me before the foundation of the world. So there we have it. Jesus prays for unity, and it's he specifies the unity, and I think that there's so many kind of threads that we can follow with little details like this when we examine this prayer that can apply to our own prayer life, can apply to our own spiritual maturity and things of that nature. So Jesus Jesus prays that the glory which he used to have, that it may be restored to him. That the glory which you gave me, I have given it to them. So Jesus has bestowed that glory upon his disciples. And it's through that glory because if there's a characteristic that Christ has, who also shares that characteristic? The Father, right? So if Christ has the characteristic of glory, then that is it's a mirror image or a copy or a reflection of, or however you want to say it. It's exactly the same as the glory that the Father has. And so when Jesus says, then the glory which you gave me, I have given to them. So he has bestowed that glory upon his disciples. And then, because the disciples now sharing the glory that he has, the disciples and Christ can be one with one another in the same way that Jesus and the Father were one with one another. Jesus and the Father shared glory. And so when you look at one, what was it that he had told Thomas earlier when Jesus said, Thomas said to Jesus, show us the Father and that is enough. What did Jesus say?
If you've seen me, you have seen the
Yeah,
Father.
if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I did show you the Father. You've seen him all along because I've shown him to you through me. And so now Jesus is saying, the glory, Father, that you've given me, I have placed upon my followers, upon them. And so if somebody were to say to us, show us Jesus, and that is enough, what should our response be able to be? I've been showing you Jesus because I live the life that he calls me to live, because he is reflected in the things that I do, because he's the one that empowers me to be able to do the things that I do, or that calls me to do the things that I do. And so it's a real thing for us to be able to show people Christ. And we don't do that, proudly or arrogantly or puff ourselves up and say, I'm just like Jesus, but we have that humility of understanding without Jesus we are nothing. I can't show you Jesus except that he has placed his glory within us. And so Jesus here is saying that he has given his followers that glory that the Father had given him. And when we look at Jesus, we see the Father. When we look at Jesus' followers, we should see Jesus. And that's a tremendous thought. I mean, that's a daunting thought for us to consider, that other people need to see Christ in us. He goes on with that thought in verse 23, I in them and thou in me, that they may be perfected in unity. Complete.
Mature.
Kind of a scary word, though. I mean, even if we understand, okay, we use the word perfect maybe in a little different nuance or sense or vernacular than the word here really means when we want to kind of break it down and see what it means. It means complete, it means mature, it means fully developed, it means fit for the purpose for which it was created. Okay, and so if we are perfected, if we are made complete, if we are made mature, what does Jesus say is the avenue through which that takes place? It's through unity. We can't be divided as a body of believers and be mature, be complete, be perfect. We are only complete when we are unified in the way that Christ and the Father are unified. Think about what it would have looked like had Christ come to earth and said, I was sent here by my Father to do X, Y, and Z. I really like X. I really like Y. Z I'm not so keen on, so I'm going to leave that one out. Is the Father glorified by that? No. The Father's not glorified by that. Is the Son glorified by that? Not at all.
But see, Jesus came, he humbled himself to the point to death on the cross.
Absolutely. He humbled himself.
So he came to do everything to completion
And
that
through-
God sent him to do.
And through that unity with the Father was glorified. And because the Father's been glorified, Christ has been glorified. And so with us, when Christ prays for unity with us, for us, as his believers, that unity only happens, or that maturity, that perfection only happens, only takes place through our complete and total unity with his purpose, which means if I'm completely and fully, if I'm able to achieve that, completely and fully unified with Christ, and and you're able to achieve that completely and perfectly unified with Christ, what does that mean for us? We have to be unified together, right? Because I can't be unified with Christ and you unified with Christ and us separate.
I think you're dead on that, because that's the only way to do it, is to be that, because anything else is human efforts.
That's right.
Outside, for me to say, well, I need to always be nice to Chuck, or I always need to be nice to Jim, that's not the point.
Yeah.
If you humble yourself, as Christ did to God, humble yourself to them, by default, if everyone does that, you're unified.
Yes. That's well said. That's it, exactly the way it is. And so we unify with each other by unifying with Christ.
But it does take effort.
Oh, for sure. It takes, it takes effort. We have to yield, which takes effort. And then whatever, by yielding to God and yielding to His will, whatever then He decides that our responsibility or duty is, that takes effort to fulfill those as well. And He supplies that strength. Great.
I think 1 Peter 4:11 gives a practical application of how to glorify God by that unity. It says, if anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To Him be the glory and the power forever and ever. What does it mean to reflect that glory? It means speaking as the words that God has given us, serving the way with the strength that God's given us.
Right. Yeah, it is by His strength, and I like, by the strength which God supplies. We are powerless to glorify ourselves, despite what the latest shoe advertisement says on TV or whatever it is. We are powerless to glorify ourselves. The only way to truly be glorified is for God to glorify us, and we only do that by yielding to His will. And then He provides the strength for us then to do that. So it's a really beautiful picture if you can wrap your mind around it and see it. So much of the world sees it completely backwards and thinks of it as they don't see it as humbling, they see it as humiliating. And there's a difference between those two. And it's never an act of humiliation, it's an act of humbling. And so.
Well, see, we humble ourselves. Humiliation comes from somebody else.
Yeah.
Jesus never did humiliate us.
Exactly, that's right. Okay. And so here Jesus again prays in verse 24, Father, I desire that they also you give me, be with me where I am, in order that they may behold my glory. I can't, of course, nor can you put yourself into the place of Jesus. It's hard enough for us to put ourselves in the place of the disciples and the things that they're going through on this night, but to put ourselves in Jesus' place is impossible. But imagine what Jesus gave up. And we read the passage in Philippians 2, we can intellectually go through that exercise of what it was like to be seated on a throne in heaven as the creator of all things, and then to leave that behind and come to the earth and to humble yourself to the point of death. But at all of that time, to be aware of who you are and what you're capable of and what your natural state is, and to be surrounded by these humans who don't see it, who can't fathom it. Even though we've had Peter make the confession, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Even though, in this night they've said some things that indicate that they're starting to make headway, they're starting to understand a little bit about who Jesus is. They just can't grasp it. And for Jesus to pray, Father, I really want them to see what things really are. I really want them to see my true nature. I really want them to see what you see when you look at me. That's an amazing prayer, and what a goal for all of us to have in mind, that one day we see Jesus just as He is. That we see Him, unfettered by human restraints. That He is just God. And that's the prayer that Jesus has for His followers, that they would be able to see Him in His glory. And then, as much as we can, we comprehend the love of God. We comprehend how much God loves the Son, how much God loves us. But until we see that love in its truest, purest, most natural state, heaven, we really can't understand it. And so that glory that Christ has, that he wants the disciples to see him in that state, is all bound up in the love that God has for him, and the love that they have for one another. It's beyond what we really can fathom to be able to think about those things. Good stuff. Any other thoughts on that? Let's move into the next section, 25 and 26. Oh, righteous Father, although, excuse me. Oh, righteous Father, although the world has not known you, yet I have known you, and these have known that you sent me. You and I have made your name known to them and will make it known, so that the love with which you loved me may be in them and I in them. Jesus said, interestingly, he says, I have made it known and will make it known. What's left to do for him to fulfill? The cross, right? I mean, he has yet to perform the greatest act of love that the world has ever known, which is giving his life for the guilty, right? He said that a man might give his life for a righteous one, but for a guilty one, who would give their life? And Jesus has done that, or Jesus hasn't done that yet. He's going to do that. And so I have been making it known. I've been showing them the Father. You even said that, we just mentioned it. Thomas said, show me the Father. I've shown you myself, and I've shown you the Father through me. That's what I've been doing. I've been showing you the Father all along. But I still have one thing left to show you that will demonstrate the Father's love for you. It's interesting, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. I mean, we talk about the Father's love in giving his Son, and Jesus isn't saying, look how much I love you, I'm giving you myself for you. He says, look how much the Father loves you, because he's giving me to you, right? And so even at the moment when Jesus could point to himself and say, what I'm doing for you is pretty cool, he still is pointing at the Father and saying, it's the Father who's making the sacrifice. It's the Father who's giving his Son. And so, but I will make it known. I will make the glory of the Father known by the way that I live out the next couple of days here. And so Jesus mentions that in the prayer, that will be that final act of glorification that represents the love that the Father has for people. So that brings us to the end of John chapter 17. I have made it known, I will make it known. For me, the key words, go ahead, Sam.
Well, I just wanted to say, he has made it known to the Israelites, to God's people, but after the death, burial, resurrection, the church goes out to all nations. It goes out to the Gentiles as well. It's poured out over all people.
That's a great point, and the extent to which it is known will be spreading exponentially over the years of the Book of Acts and the spread of the church, and as the gospel is made available to the Gentiles. That's a great point. The love, God so loved the world. It wasn't God so loved Israel. It was God so loved the world that he did this. Okay. For me, the key words of John 17, glory and glorify. Jesus was all about glorifying the Father, making sure that what he did brought glory to the Father, and what a tremendous example that is for us as we think about how to glorify the Son or how to glorify the Father, do the things we do. Justin talked some about the word name, and that's been kind of a recurring thing through the last couple of chapters that we looked at, where it is, God's name is going to be glorified, it's God's name that's going to be protected, it's God's name that's going to be elevated above all things. And then a word that is important all the way through the book of John, but especially important in a couple of these later chapters, is truth. And so we'll see, we saw the truth highlighted in chapter 17, we're going to see it highlighted again in chapter 18. This prayer for me is the final intimate look into the mind and the heart of Jesus. There's so many final things in these chapters. We talk about you know, the final lesson that Jesus teaches his disciples was a lesson on service. He had them gathered together for one final thing at the Last Supper. And what did he choose to do? Take the towel and wash it out and wash their feet. So he gave them a lesson on service. That's how important that was. I think how important that subject is based on the fact that he spent his final hours with them doing that. But here, this is literally the last things that they hear him say before they pack up their stuff and then leave the other room. So they've been a couple of times through these chapters, we've seen Jesus say it's time for us to go. And then they stay and they talk some more. And then he says again, it's just like when we are at grandma's house leaving, you know, Christmas or whatever. It's, you know, I better hit the road. And then you say, stay and talk for another half hour. You know, that's probably time for me to go. And then you talk for another half hour. Because you don't really want to go, right? And that's kind of the way it was here. Jesus says a couple of times through these chapters, it's time for us to go, and then they stick around.
It's,
And
I think, because he really had more that he needed to
he
tell
had
them.
more to say, and they had more questions, and they needed more reassurance, and they needed more comfort, and more instruction, and all of those things. And so, when it finally is time to go, how does Jesus end that time there with them? But he ends it in prayer. It's interesting that he talks to the disciples for chapters 13 through 16, and in that space, it's like, well, we better go, and then, okay, now it really is time to go, let's close with a prayer. And that's how we close it, right? I mean, that's how we do things to this day. When it's time for us to go, it's time for our closing prayer to go. And so, this really gives us that kind of that final look into the heart and into the mind of Jesus as he's gathered with his disciples there in the upper room. Because after this, things change. Things begin to unfold very, very rapidly once they get to the garden. And we know through the other Gospels as well that things kind of spread out a little bit, and there's not as much personal contact with the disciples as there is in this enclosed space in the upper room. So, what we read here is really, it's just intimate. It's a great word for it, I think. So what matters most to Jesus is revealed to us in this prayer. This is what is on the heart of the Son of God as he spends his last few minutes gathered with his disciples before he goes to the cross. I mean, this is what his heart was pouring out to his Father, that he wanted God to be glorified. That's bottom line. Whatever else happens next, Father, I want you to be glorified. However the things unfold, and not that he didn't know how they were going to unfold, but whatever happens next, Father, glorify your name. And then, knowing what's coming next, who does he spend time praying for? For himself. He spends time praying for his disciples, for his followers. He prays for their salvation, and he prays for their unity. And he prays that his mission would be brought to a faithful end. I mean, shouldn't that be our prayer? I mean, shouldn't those things be part of every prayer we pray? Father, glorify your name. Whatever happens next. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 20 minutes. But whatever happens, Father, glorify your name. And whatever happens next, Father, make salvation important enough to the people in my life that it's realized, that salvation is achieved. And let us be one and face whatever happens next together. And Father, whatever happens next, your mission takes importance over everything else. And that's the prayer that Jesus prayed for his final time with the disciples. What an impactful thing for us to study. I think we ought to read John 17 every day. Other final thoughts before we move in and start chapter 18? Okay. I took out the slide that had Justin's, oh no, I did not, I did it here. Here's Justin's final, I took it out of one version, but it stayed in this one. Here's what's Justin's final thoughts were, but he's not here to elaborate. Jesus cares about us. If Jesus cares that we are unified, Unity, I think, should say does not just fall in our lap. We have to pursue it. And what are you doing to pursue unity? I think that's a great point. Sometimes people have a picture of prayer that we pray for things and then we sit back and wait for God to do something. Right? So that's not the way it always works. I'm not sure I like this saying 100%, but I did read, somebody one time wrote, in something I was reading where it said, pray like it depends 100% on God, and then work like it depends 100% on you.
Yeah, no, we can't agree with that.
So I kind of like the idea of not just praying and then sit back and say, okay, God, it's all yours, I'm just gonna sit back and watch. That's not the way we should do it. But,
No, we continue to live our lives.
well, if we continue to pursue the things that we're praying for. We don't pray for knowledge and then never read our Bibles. We don't pray for patience and then, bury our heads in the sand when something bad happens in our life. We don't pray for unity and then avoid people. We still have to go out and do those things and then, pursue those things that we're praying for. So I understand the sentiment of that statement. I'm not sure, I think I'd have to tweak that in some way if I were to use it, but.
Yeah, I think it needs a little tweaking because it reminds me of what I do, which is I find myself in fact, not meaning to, but saying, thank you, God, I'll take it from here.
I'll take it from here.
Which doesn't work.
Yeah. I am as guilty of that as anybody has ever been guilty of anything. And for sure that is not, that is come back to haunt me sometimes. So, yeah, I appreciate that thought that it's, we pray about it because we don't see a way out of us, or we don't see how it's gonna unfold, and then something starts to unravel, or something starts to become clear, and it's like, oh, okay, I can go with it from here, God, I got the rest of the way, we can take a day off. That's not a good thing. All right. Well, let's jump into John chapter 18 to get started there. The first 10, 11 verses kind of make one section, a little bit of a longer section, but but I think it'll be okay. We can jump in and do that whole thing and refer back a time or two if we need to. Verses 1 through 11, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden, in which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am he." Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with him. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Therefore he again asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way, to fulfill the word which he spoke. Of those whom you have given me, I lost not one." Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said, "Peter, put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" So, first of all, this ought to clear things up really well. I'm an expert at Jerusalem. I don't even know the word.
Geography.
The geography, thank you. That's, I could only think of archaeology, and I knew that wasn't right. Geography, I'm an expert on Jerusalem geography from all my visits there. Is this thing work? Oh, dude. Oh, okay, yeah, I can see it back there too. Okay, so some of this is, some of this we know. Some of this is a little bit traditional or speculative. There in that little center of that circle area, that would say upper room traditional. That's the traditional location of the upper room down in the west quadrant of Old Jerusalem. And so, Herod's palace is up here, right above the upper room, just above that, the words say high priest's house. And so, some things that are going to be significant places in the coming part of the story. We see that they're all pretty close together if those locations are accurate, which they're the traditional locations. I don't know how accurate we would make those. Of course, the temple, we know where that was. That's the spot. That's where the temple was. And then right here is the Mount of Olives, right there. That little blob there is Gethsemane. That's the garden that we're fixing to go to. This line down through here, that's the Kidron Valley. And so when they left Jerusalem, they went out across the Kidron Valley and to the garden right there. Okay? We're thereabouts. How accurately we know the location of any of those things is, your guess is as good as mine. But that gives you a little bit of a sense of the layout of Jerusalem. It looks like from the upper room to Gethsemane is about that far. I don't know how far that would be. I don't know how long it would take to get there.
You're a great
We're talking-
expert.
I'm really good at mathing. So I don't know if we're talking, a 20-minute walk, if we're talking an hour walk. I really don't know how far away Gethsemane was from that traditional location. They did not call an Uber. I'm sure that it arrived. But probably a good little stretch of the legs to get out and over there. So there you go. But I like to have a little idea of the layout there. It's interesting, a couple of details to bring out of this section. It's interesting to me that Judas knew where Jesus would go. If there's any doubt that Judas was a full participant in the things that the disciples have done up to this point, this one little thing should put that to rest. Because Judas had spent enough time in the presence of Jesus to know where Jesus was going to go.
Because
How
he
do
went
you
there
know
often. He went there often.
with that detail? Because he went there often, and Judas knows this is it's a feast. Celebration of the feast is going on. The Passover is there. It is there. It's a special time. Judas knows as well as anyone that during those moments of great importance, those feast times, that Jesus was going to be concentrating on praying, that he was going to be there in the quiet doing what he always did. And so Judas knew where Jesus would go, and knew then to lead the soldiers to that place. A couple of other little details. The idea of it, it says in verse 3, Judas then having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees came to our planners and forged with weapons. So you have any footnote next to cohort, what that means? How big was the cohort?
Normally 600 men,
A cohort
a battalion.
was a battalion, 600 men, 600 Roman soldiers. I doubt that there was a full 600. I don't think that all 600 of them geared up and went out to arrest one person. But it's possible. I think this was a representative of that cohort, and I think what this is indicating is that there is a full battalion prepared should he be needed. Because what is it that the Jewish leaders are charging Jesus with? What have they told the Romans Jesus is trying to do?
Serve the throne.
Usurp the throne. This man's starting a rebellion. This man's claiming to be a king. He's got followers who are zealous. He's got people who are willing to die for him. He's got, they have sold this to the Roman government that this guy is dangerous. And the Roman government does not mess around. You want to, the only thing I can tell you, this is off the top of my head, you want to think of an example where people don't mess around? Go to the airport and joke with one of the Homeland Security agents about what's in your bag. You know what I've got in there? And make a joke about having something illegal in your bag. See how they laugh. Okay? And so if you take Jewish leaders, not just some nobody that nobody knows, but you take representatives of the high priest from the Jewish leadership, and you send them to the leader of the Roman cohort, the battalion that's stationed in Jerusalem, and you say, we've got a guy that's trying to start a rebellion over here, we need you to come arrest him. Are they gonna take that seriously? Yes, this is big news. And so whether or not all 600 of that battalion are present, or there's a smaller representative, a platoon of them of some kind, and the other 600 are back in the barracks ready to go, that's up for question, but they're all ready. And so, this is not small time stuff. This is a big thing that's going on. Jesus, therefore, he sees them coming, and what is Jesus' response?
He greets them, he walks up to them, and he asks them, who are you looking for?
He knew all things, he knew they were coming, and he greeted them.
He went up
He
to
asked them,
them, who are you looking
who are
for?
you looking for? And when they said, we are, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus the Nazarene. Is there anything noteworthy about what he says in your Bibles? And this is kind of harder for me to see in my Bible, my eyes are getting bad. What does he say?
He says, I am he, but they obviously didn't know who he was.
When you look at the word he, what do you notice about it?
It's
It's
capitalized.
italicized. What does that mean?
It's not there, but
The word he is not there in the original text. What did Jesus actually say? I am. Where have we heard that before? He is the I am. And so some have even speculated, well, how do they respond when he says that? They draw back and they fall to the ground. Some have speculated that when he said that that was a demonstration of power. That was a demonstration that he is in control of this moment.
Well, and he is God.
He is God. He is the I am.
Because falling to the ground, that is an act of recognizing him as God.
Yeah, it's an act of worship, it's an act
Yes.
of however you want to say it, but why do Roman soldiers, when one man says, I am he, or I am, why would a cohort or platoon, or whatever it is of Roman soldiers, why would they retreat and fall to the ground just at the words of one man? Unless there was some demonstration of power that went with that. It's an interesting thought. I can't prove it. I can't be dogmatic about it, but it's an interesting thought to consider that when Jesus says those words, that it brings some kind of truth to their ears, that they know the only way that this proceeds from this point on is if he allows it to proceed. And I think what we see next, the same commentator, says, Jesus, again, therefore, verse 7, he says, whom do you seek? Jesus the Nazarene. And he said, I told you that I am. If therefore you seek me, let these go their way. If they're there to arrest the man for sedition, and they've got what they think is his army, his generals, his leadership with him, are they going to be very interested in letting those guys go? I would think not. I mean, I'm not a military strategist.
Strategist?
But it would seem to me that if, hey, we've got the top guy and we've got all of his generals right here with us, we need to take all of them in. And that general says, you know what, I'll go with you, but these guys get to go. Again, I mean, it seems to me that there's some kind of realization or some kind of demonstration of power here that goes beyond just one human man speaking forcefully. Greg?
It reminds me back in John 7:46 and 45, where the temple guards were sent out and they went back to the Pharisees And the Pharisees asked him, why didn't you bring him in? And they said, no one ever spoke the way this man does.
Yeah.
Demonstration of power.
Yeah, something unique was going on here that they had not experienced before. Scott?
Well, and then just add to your point, is then Peter, one of those people that they're going to let go, attacks
Yeah.
the Malchus, cuts off his ear with a sword. So they're armed, at least Peter was.
Yeah.
And
And they still
something was,
let
and they let him go.
And they still let him
And
go.
that's not a Roman thing to do. So
Yeah,
there was some, either it was the way
Yeah.
he said it, or there was somebody who said demonstration of power.
Yeah.
But they obviously recognize like this ain't just
Yeah.
some guy.
If he comes with us, it's because he's willing to come with us, not because we're so powerful here. And so, it's an interesting way to look at this. I think sometimes again, and again, we have to kind of, I don't know the word I'm looking for. You guys keep throwing out the words I'm looking for me. We have to make these two things go together. The fact that Jesus is God and that he is the I am, and he has a demonstration of power, and he can do whatever he wants to do. And as a lamb led before the shears is dumb, and you know, he is meek and gentle in spirit, and he is the Prince of Peace, and he is stands before them without saying a word. So, you know, you have to kind of make those two things fit, and I think they perfectly do with Jesus, because he had the power to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted to do it, and he yielded that power. He did not exercise that power. And so, sometimes I think it takes as much power to do nothing as it would take to do something, if that makes sense. He demonstrated power through his willingness to do nothing, and go with him. So, Jesus demonstrates who he is, and then Jesus protects his own. You know, the idea that you're going to let these go, because that the word might be fulfilled. And what did Jesus already pray in John 17? You know, none of these that you have given me have been lost, except for the one that's standing there betraying. And who is it that stays? Well, Judas is there to the end, or at least there through this part of the episode, and the rest of them, those who are faithful. It's ironic that those who are faithful scatter, but the one that betrayed him, in this case, stays.
Okay, so that's a part of his prayer. He said, because he asked God to not take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one.
Yeah, you're right. And so, then Simon, Peter draws his sword and chops off the dude's ear. That's just, there's a whole lot of questions I have about that whole episode. How did Peter not die in that moment? It's only because Jesus didn't will for him to die. I mean, it wasn't, how does a Roman soldier not draw his sword and lop off Peter's head? It's interesting that I wonder what would have happened if Peter had chopped off a Roman soldier's ear instead of, a Jewish man's ear. I think that would have been a different line to cross. But, it was a slave's ear, although it was the high priest's slave, so an attack against the high priest's slave would be an attack against the high priest himself. Lots of little nuanced details to that story there. Jesus stops him with a word. He doesn't have to, I don't think, miraculously intervene to stop Peter, although in the other Gospels we have that Jesus does restore Malchus's ear. And so how do you arrest the guy after that happens, right? I mean, you just saw an ear laying on the ground and now he fixed it. And let's go ahead and arrest him anyway. And so, lots of little details like that wrapped up into the story. And since we are going to, take note of some things that Peter does next, it's interesting that although Peter very soon is going to deny Jesus, as Jesus said he would, in this moment, I think Peter was ready to die. Peter knows what he's doing. This is as rash as Peter could be, and as kind of, exuberant as Peter could get at times. Do you think Peter hasn't thought this through? You think Peter is just acting on a whim here, and you have to use his sword a while, maybe it's time I lop somebody's ear off. Peter knows what he's doing. Peter's starting a revolution. Peter's firing the shot heard around the world. Peter is at Lexington and Concord, and he fires the first shot of the revolution. That's what he thinks he's doing. He's ready to die for Jesus, but he's ready to die for Jesus because he believes that it's time to overthrow the Roman government. It's time to overthrow the corrupt Jewish leadership. It's time to overthrow the Roman government. It's time to restore the kingdom of Israel. Is that fair? I think that's what Peter's doing. And so later, when Peter runs away and denies knowing Jesus, are we hard on Peter for his failure? When Peter was willing to go to his death in this moment? I think we're hard on him, and we'll talk more about this next week because we're gonna get into that section. But you know, Peter was ready to go down this road. That was going to be a hard road to go down. It was going to be full of battles and maybe giving his own life. And Jesus said, Peter, this is not the road I want you to go down. I want you to go down this road. It's not going to be less difficult. It's just a different road. And Peter had to give up on this vision. He had to give up on that idea of what life was going to be in order to go down this road that Jesus wanted him to be on. It's not that Peter wasn't willing. He just had to make that change. And sometimes it takes us a little while to make a change. So I think there's a big lesson in there for us as well about, you know, giving up. Sometimes giving up what we think is the right way to go is actually harder than going the right way. Does that make sense? And so Peter had to give up something in order to go the right direction. And that can be really, really hard. So, good lesson there for us. All right, we'll pick up with verse 12 next week.
Jason, that same temple graphic is in the back of the Pew Bible, and it's about 3/4 of a mile from the upper room to Gibson.
3/4 of a mile, I can do that in 6 minutes if I had to. The bear was chasing me. No, about 20 minutes.
About 20 seconds. Gotcha.
Probably about 20 minutes. I don't have to be faster than bear, I just gotta be faster than you.
Right, yeah.